Hi, my name is Heath, and you've tuned into a Media Diet Comics commentary. Today we're talking about three comics. We're talking about three DC dollar comics, and these are kind of the DC corollary to the Marvel True Believers that I just commented on not too many days ago. They don't come out as often, they don't come out as plentifully, but they're still worth picking up. And they cover actually a wider range of time in DC's history as well. The True Believers stuff tends to be more in the Bronze Age and the Silver Age, and it is rare that they even dip into the 90s. And so that recent Black Widow True Believer from 1999, for example, was a bit of an anomaly. So we have three titles today. We have Dollar Comics Batman reprint of number 663, and this was originally published in 2007, but came out this year with a cover date of June, although with the pandemic and distribution being wonky, it came out more recently than that. We also have DC Dollar Comics Birds of Prey number 1. That originally came out in 1999, I believe, and has a cover date or a publication date that is indeterminate. So Birds of Prey. This came out more recently than the Batman. And then lastly, and most recently, we have a Dollar Comics Sandman number 23. And this was originally published in 1991 and has a cover date of January 2021. So we're already publishing into next year. So interesting books. Worth picking up. Again, great for gifts for people who are new to comics. Great to fill in some key issue slots if you just want a reading copy versus something that is of the time. And absolutely wonderful. They only cost $1. And I wish that DC came out with more of these. These are also tied into reprint events and activities. And so this Batman reprint refers to the Joker 80th Anniversary 100-page Super Spectacular, which was originally going to be on sale in April of this year. This Birds of Prey reprint says to be continued in the Birds of Prey Volume 1 graphic novel, which might have come out relatively recently, and that issue actually has a house ad for the 3 volumes of that reprint. And the Sandman dollar comic, let's see what it's tying into. It has a house ad for the Sandman Universe Lock and Key 2-issue miniseries that's coming out jointly between DC and IDW. And there's also some back matter on the Dreaming Waking Hours number 1. So it's just connecting the original Sandman series and Gaiman's work to other recent things. Although throughout the Sandman comic, there's other house ads of note. We have some collected volume reprints advertised. We have the Audible original recording also featured. Some other Gaiman stuff featured in a house ad. Lucifer, a kind of sideline series by another creator. The Dreaming Waking Hours, which is a sideline with other people. Even the audiobook, those things are kind of odd. Yeah, you actually buy a physical thing that holds the MP3 that you can listen to with earphones. Those make sense if you have a lot of stuff on it. Just one audiobook, I don't think it's worth the shelf space. And so, interesting stuff. So, all tied into other things going on. The first two tied into reprint volumes, and the last one less tied into something that's timely, but there's plenty of Sandman stuff going on. I think the Audible original is probably the most recent thing. And so, how are they? The Batman issue, when I first saw it, I was actually angry. Written by Grant Morrison, which is a good thing. Art by John Van Fleet. But the art from Van Fleet is this kind of like 3D art. Almost like that on a Residence album cover of more recent vintage. There's some more of the 3D art. and it's not really my thing. Don't like it. Doesn't speak to me aesthetically. Not interested in looking at it. And so when I first got this, saw what was being reprinted, it's almost like video game stills, which if you're a gamer, you might like more. But I was not looking forward to reading it. And then I shifted my thinking, because I was also hung up on the idea that this isn't a comic book. This is an illustrated story. And I read comics to read comics. If this were a Big Little book, it would be different. If it was a prose book that had illustrations, that would be different. But this kind of awkward middle ground, calling itself a comic, just too many illustrations for the text, and illustrations that I'm not interested in looking at. And no offense intended to John Van Fleet. It's just not my thing. So I had to shift my thinking. I had to shift my thinking from not liking the art, not thinking that it was a comic book, and thinking about it more as this is a short story written by Grant Morrison. And I shifted my thinking even more to say this is a pulp fiction story written by Grant Morrison. And that shift in thinking actually made reading this extremely enjoyable. And so thinking about this as an issue of a pulp fiction magazine featuring Batman, the Batman, in a pulp fiction-like story, written by Grant Morrison, broken into chapters. It's got chapter headings and everything. I enjoyed it a lot. I would have enjoyed it more in the style of a pulp magazine, probably, because I like pulp magazines. Probably if there wasn't a background behind the text and it really was more just text page. If it had been collected in a book, like this would be great as a short story in a book. But as a comic, it took me some doing to get over my preconceived notions and biases and judgments against it. And so as a reader, that was an interesting experience. The story is about Batman going to see the Joker in prison. The Joker and Harley Quinn aren't really getting along. Batman gets in the middle of that. Really dark love story between the Joker and Harley Quinn in a way that I was aware of, but hadn't really exposed myself to that much. I'm not a big Harley Quinn fan. Mostly because the Joker doesn't deserve her love. is kind of my thought on the matter. So, really interesting. Had a lot of biases and judgments against this. Once I thought about it as a short story written by Grant Morrison in the style of the old school pulps, I was hooked. And I was sold. And it's a wonderful read. You might really enjoy the art. You might like that video game-like 3D style. But I did not so much. But as a story, it reads well. And so, interesting reprint. Curious what other people think of this issue as an issue of a comic book. I do not think it's an issue of a comic book. The next reprint, Birds of Prey, was also really interesting. So let me just make sure I stick to the creators because I missed that last time. So the Batman reprint was Grant Morrison writing and art by John Van Fleet. So the Birds of Prey reprint was from Birds of Prey #1, again from 1999. And the creative team on that, Chuck Dixon, writer, Greg Land, penciler, and Drew Garaci, or Garaci. You can correct me in the comments below if I mispronounced it, as inker. And pretty straightforward comic from the late 90s. Not as garish or hatchy as some stuff from the 90s. This actually looks really nice. Focuses on Black Canary, focuses on Oracle, who's, I believe, a newish character at the time. And a good story. A good story actually makes me want to check out the collected volumes that it's tied into. And that is not that common, because I like these reprints just as reprints. But the art is clean, the story's good, it's kind of an action-adventure tale. like an 80s adventure movie on an island. Oracles behind the scenes, work in the computer, black canaries on the ground, kicking butt and taking names. There's a twist at the end that you don't expect. And the only thing that bugged me was, I don't know if it probably won't show up on the screen, but given the scan quality and the DPI that they went with, some of the text doesn't seem like it reproduced that well. And so there's some slight pixelation in the lettering. And the pixelation doesn't come across the same in the artwork. And so I don't think it's a general scan quality issue. But in the text, I did find the text fuzzy. And that was challenging. And I know that's an opportunity and an invitation to make a "you're getting older" joke. Not fuzzy for those reasons. Fuzzy because of scan quality and DPI. So really interesting reprint, a series worth checking out. The collaboration between Dixon Land and Garaci really worked well in a way that a lot of 90s collaborations didn't for me. The 90s were not my decade in comics. Actually, the latter half of the 90s probably. And maybe even into the early 2000s. But worth checking out, and there's 3 volumes of the series collected. So maybe worth a look. And the last one we're going to talk about, DC Dollar Comics, The Sandman number 23. Originally published in 1991. I read this when it came out. It's got a creative team of Neil Gaiman, writer, Kelly Jones, penciler, Malcolm Jones III, inker, and what a wonderful comic. At the time, I read it much more for Gaiman's writing than anyone who was drawing it. And so it was interesting for me, as someone who likes Kelly Jones, his Deadman stuff is just crazy. Just look at the folds in that fabric. I like Kelly Jones, but I didn't read it for the art. I read it for the story and for the words and for the way that the words made me feel. And so this took me back, because I haven't reread Sandman since then. I have some of the collected volumes, I think, from back in the day, but I haven't reread Gaiman's comics since he started writing fiction and publishing fiction. So interesting to return to this. And what a great story. Basically a story about Satan closing up shop in hell. What if all the souls in hell were sent somewhere else? What if he closed and locked the gates? What if he gave you the key? A really interesting story. Very much for mature readers. There's some neat Voivod-like or H.R. Geiger-like architecture there in the opening spread. We have Jones' art excellent throughout. There are some dark bits and shocking bits, just a neat 3-panel look at Dream himself. Kind of a Clive Barker moment there, a bit intense for the younger reader. There's a couple of other images. Actually, I'm not going to share them with you because they're so cool to see in the book. So be sure to read this if you like Neil Gaiman and if you like The Sandman, or if you like Satan. Today, I think, is Aleister Crowley's feast day or something like that. So great reprint. Worth returning to, probably worth returning to in collections, but it held up well. As I said, I had not read Gaiman's comics since originally reading them, and this makes me think that maybe I need to return to Sandman. 1, revisit it again, see if it makes me feel the same, see if the references to legend and lore and myth hit me the same, and 2, see if I pay more attention to the art this time. Because the first time around, I was not reading it for the art. Ignored the art, paid attention to Gaiman, and it's worth it. But really interesting reading experience here. So 3 DC dollar comics. Sandman, Birds of Prey. This, I think, is my pick of the 3. And this Batman reprint. I say to DC, do more Pulp Fiction-like stories. You can do them as audiobooks, do them as downloads, even if they're shorter. But print them in print, just as books or booklets, or as a little digest magazine. There's a lot of opportunity here in the way that Grant Morrison approached the character. And it's not just dependent on the storyline with the Joker. It's an idea that could be returned to for many of the characters. Well, thank you for tuning in today. This has been Media Diet Comics Commentary. My name is Heath, and I'll see you next time. Bye.